Good morning again, and welcome to today's top story. It's Thursday, it's the 11th of October, and we are going to talk about climate change. Whether you are on one side of the issue or another, I think it's important to have the right information and to talk about some of the things that indicate that there is indeed a problem. And to talk to us a little bit more about that is somebody who just was published, which is so exciting, and works at Algoma University, Dr. Brandon Shamp. Brandon, good of you to join us. Thanks so much.
Oh, it's nice to be here. Thanks
now,
for
what do
having
you
me.
do exactly at the university? Are you a teacher?
I am. I'm a professor in the Department of Biology and Environmental Science. So I teach courses within that program, and I do have an active research program as well.
So when you talk about a research program, how does that work? Is it funded through the university and then they hire you?
Actually, when I first arrived at Algoma University about 11 years ago, I applied for a federal research grant to the main science research granting agency in Canada called NSERC, Natural Science and Engineering Council of Canada, and I was successful. So they gave me a grant for 5 years to do research, and then since then I've gotten another one of those. So my research is funded by the federal government.
So if you've gotten another one, I assume it's because they think you're doing a good job.
So far, so good.
So congratulations on being published. That's exciting.
Thanks.
Yeah, you were published in the science journal Nature.
Yeah.
First time published?
Certainly in that journal.
Yeah.
That's probably, I think the reason it's captured so much attention is, first of all, the work is really important, but also because that journal is probably the top science journal in the world.
So with regards to the research that you're doing in climate change, it's interesting to read about how the size of plants is an indicator. Explain that to us, maybe.
Yeah, so what the research that I was a part of, so it was a large group project with 130 researchers all around the world, putting their data from smaller projects together to answer a bigger question. And the question that they were interested in understanding is, how are plant communities changing in the Arctic? In the Arctic tundra, the environment and the temperatures are changing more rapidly there than anywhere else in the world. So it's an excellent sort of place to look at how natural communities, plant communities, are changing over time. And if you can take a look back over the last 30 years, which is what we did, you can see what happened, and you can get an idea of what is going to happen in the future, and that's why the work was so compelling.
Why do you think that it happened so quickly there in that area? Just because it's such an extreme weather condition?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. There are fewer moderating forces there.
Now, when you talk about 130 people involved in this particular project, what did they do? How did they determine that there was a problem?
Well, the project was led by two particular researchers in Europe, actually, Dr. Anne Bjorkman and Dr. Isla Myers-Smith, and they coordinated the project. They had an idea that they could bring together a lot of data from different projects to understand this bigger question of how the different kinds of plants and so were changing in the Arctic. And so what they did is they found information about the characteristics of these plants from all over the world, tested how they were related to temperature and other environmental features, and then used that to sort of understand how the actual vegetation they looked at in 27, or I think it's 117 actually different sites in the Arctic were changing over time with respect to the characteristics of those plants. So they weren't looking at who was who, for example, in the plants, but they were looking at what characteristics were changing, because the characteristics of plants tell you a lot about how they're functioning, how they're capturing resources, and how they're growing.
And one of the big ones was that the plants are getting bigger.
Yeah.
Now, instinctively, I thought, awesome, that's great, they're healthy.
Yeah. So, and that may end up being true, but it's worth clarifying though that the plants themselves are different plants. So plants are moving into the area that happen to have a bigger size, right? So
I see.
So it's not just the individual plants that are already there are growing taller. It's actually that you're getting change in the vegetation there. So plants are arriving and growing there that weren't there 30 years ago, and they're taller.
And it's because of climate change.
Yeah, it's because of changing temperature. So there's a strong correlation between the changing temperature and those changes.
Now, when you talk about such a huge project and coordinating all these people,
Yeah.
it's sort of hard to imagine. And when someone goes to do this research, do they go and camp out in the Antarctic for a 6-month period and measure plants? How does that work?
Well, I think some people do send researchers or send students and do some research in those particular sites. So the 117 sites that they actually recorded vegetation change over those 3 decades, those would be people out there doing survey work and identifying which species were there and putting together those kinds of databases.
Now, with regards to climate change, do you feel like the education level is where it should be? Just in general.
So I do. I actually think that there's a ton of information on climate change, and I don't think the information about climate change is at all standing in the way of people's decisions to move forward on it. I think it's other factors.
What are the other factors?
Well, I mean, I'm hypothesizing here, but
Sure.
you know, for example, you can look at a map of acceptance of climate change science in Canada, and it's very geographically different, right? So you have fairly strong acceptance in some areas, and then very weak acceptance in areas that are principally oil-producing areas. There's no good reason for that. There's no reason why you would accept science if you live in an oil-producing area and not, you know, or not, right? That should not determine it. The evidence should determine whether we accept it. So right now, if the evidence is out there and some people aren't accepting it, it's not that the information's not there. It's some sort of motivational challenge that they have. Either people can't get past what they can do. Governments are having trouble convincing people that we should do some hard work to address climate change. Everybody's responsible, and it's difficult to, you know, you mentioned how difficult it would be to corral 130 scientists.
Right.
So, I mean, we're talking about corralling and getting
A planet.
35 million people in Canada to agree
come on,
on.
you could help, couldn't you?
Well, you know, every time you do this kind of research and show that real changes are happening in the environment, and not just are starting, but they've been going on for 30 years, hopefully that registers with some people, because that's all scientists can do is provide information. We're not politicians. We're you know, we provide information, and we hope people will pay attention to that. But there are all kinds of motivating factors. It's, you know, it's science.
Is fear one of them? Are people
I think
scared
so.
to admit to it?
Well, I also think that people are looking for ways that are convenient ways to make changes, right? So lots of people use cloth bags or something like that at the grocery store. People
Recycle their
are open
plastics.
to those changes,
Right.
but those changes have to be available and not super inconvenient, because I don't think people are excited to make really inconvenient changes to their lifestyle to address climate change. And unfortunately, it's looking more and more like those changes are the only thing that we can do at this point.
That sounds so scary. I mean, it's been happening for 30 years, and I feel like we're just kind of getting it now as a planet. And there's still the naysayers. And what can we do as a person to fight global warming? Is there anything we can do?
Well, there's lots of things that we can do, but none of them are super popular, right? You can reduce or stop eating meat, right? A few people would be super keen to do that, and those who are okay with that probably already have, because meat production produces a lot more. It uses a lot more land, and it produces a lot more carbon than the production of fruits and vegetables or grains. Right. So because you have to grow those grains to then feed the animals that you would eat for meat. But other things, you can travel differently, travel less. If you do travel and you don't wish to make that lifestyle change, there are carbon credits that you can buy to make up for the carbon use that you're doing. So people who travel for their job could, if they choose, go and find these carbon credit sources online. And what you do is you pay a certain amount to offset your carbon use. And what
That's awesome.
they have projects that are out there that either do do things to reduce our carbon use in other areas or in different places. So it's like a substitution. It's kind of like a personal version of the cap and trade idea.
Yes, exactly.
You can do these things, but people have to decide whether they see this as a problem that's worth making those kinds of changes for.
The inconvenience of it, right?
Yeah. And it is hard. Like, I understand, like, you look outside, you're living every day, it's hard to feel that climate change is urgent. It's a very small incremental change. You know, I talk to people all the time who say, oh, it's a cold year and things like that. But of course, climate change is a global phenomenon. So
it must be frustrating for you because, as you say, it's been 30 years that it's been ongoing, and you work so closely in the field and have done such amazing research. It must be so frustrating for you to hear people say, no, it doesn't exist. It's not a problem.
Yeah, a little bit. I would say it's tough, and I think it sort of pushes scientists to be resilient and think of ways that they can communicate science better, or to make it clear, and fight against a little bit of the suggestion that some of us have heard politically that scientists are just a bunch of left-wingers who secretly want to reshape the world in some sort of left-wing fantasy.
Like a bunch of hipsters.
That's not my experience.
No.
Scientists, I have trouble disagreeing with my colleagues or finding agreement with my colleagues on very simple things. There's no coalition of scientists that are in the background across the world trying to convince people
really,
of
what
this.
would be the point of that?
It
right?
doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't.
Scientists get into science because they're interested in it. They find it fascinating. I always tell my students that the most beautiful moment in science is the moment where you finish a project and you've got some result and you're staring at it and you know something that's true about the world that nobody else knows. I think
wow!
It's a really important.
That must be powerful.
Yeah, it's a very empowering moment, and I think it's one of the beautiful things about science. But yeah, so that's what motivates most of the friends that I have who are scientists, not some sort of political agenda.
Some agenda, exactly. Yeah. Well, continued good luck, and keep reaching for those little nuggets that nobody else knows about, and make sure you let us know after
Absolutely.
You find out the proof.
Thanks so much for having me here today to talk about it.
It was good to meet you. Appreciate it.
All right.
We're going to take this break on Top Story, and we'll be right back.